think about the 14th Amendment as the end, maybe the premature end of one story, and as the beginning of another story that's still unfolding now. So the end of a story, what do I mean? So in the beginning of 1866 through to ratification in 1868, one thing that the United States is struggling with is the foundation of federal power in the Reconstruction South and more generally. And the great question is, what does the war power still authorize? Now, the war power, since John Quincy Adams in the 1830s, had been seen as one of the great writs, one of the great warrants for federal power to abolish slavery. Of course, Lincoln took Quincy Adams up on this in the Emancipation Proclamation, citing it as an act of justice and an act of military necessity, invoking a just war tradition that authorized states to pursue justice, even if it meant war. In the wake of the war, the Congress is using that war power, and it is articulated by people like Charles Sumner with Thaddeus Stevens as the central way in which the federal government can protect the free people in the American South. But in the beginning of 1866, that war power is at risk. So on April 2nd, 1866, Andrew Johnson says the war's over. The next day, the U.S. Supreme Court announces its decision, although it doesn't give us an opinion, in a case called Milligan, which is undoing the power of the federal government to use military commissions to bring justice on the ground in the Reconstruction South. And across 1866, the question of whether the federal government has the power to do things like create a Freedmen's Bureau is up in the air. Now, how does this play into the 14th Amendment? What the 14th Amendment is doing is, of course, creating a basis for ongoing federal power, and that's an important part of the story. But it's also creating the end of a particular story, the end of the just war story, in which a huge amount of power is given to the federal government to bring justice, to bring the kind of justice that emancipation brought to the South. And it's replaced by a 14th Amendment power which is considerably more limited and is limited and hedged in a variety of ways. So when I look at the text that you have in front of you, what I see is in some sense a mini constitution of its own. So it's got a section 2, which more or less sets the boundaries of the electorate. It's got a section 3 that says certain guys can't be in this new government. And it's got a section 4 and a section 1 that rules certain things for the ongoing regime out of bounds. So the end of a story, and because of the end of the story, a kind of ambiguity to it that is not just delivering ideas about justice, but in some ways cutting off our access to certain ways of advancing the project of justice, and at the same time putting in place ideals that we're still grappling with today in the U.S. Supreme Court, but not just in the U.S. Supreme Court, in the Black Lives Matter movement and elsewhere.